There is a distinct sound when an arrogant chief executive realizes he just threw away nearly $1 billion. It is a dead silence, the sound of a dry gulp as an ownership certificate slides across the boardroom table. Last week, he fired me, thinking a software engineer was easily replaceable. He forgot one rule: never anger the person holding the keys. This is how I turned his hubris into a $918 million contract. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. We want to sincerely thank you for your loyal support. But unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the operational budget to continue uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future. Because of this, we are officially moving our full operations over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are significantly longer, feature deeper descriptions, and are narrated with multiple emotional voices. You can join right now by scanning the Patreon QR code visible on your screen, or by clicking the link placed in the description and pinned comment below. Now, let us begin today's story. My name is Phoebe Brooks, and this is how my former company lost nearly $1 billion. The 42nd floor of the Aegis Health Tech Solutions building in downtown Boston smells like overpriced espresso and unearned confidence. Sunlight hit the floor-to-ceiling glass, reflecting off Julian Vance's tailored suit. Julian was 41 years old, boasting artificially white veneers and the kind of aggressive charisma that venture capitalists love to shower with money. I sat across from him in the executive boardroom, wearing my usual faded black hoodie, holding a ceramic mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. As a 32-year-old lead systems architecture engineer, I spoke the language of raw logic, binary structures, and immutable data streams. Julian spoke the language of pitch decks, corporate hype, and inflated valuations. "It is simple, Phoebe," Julian said, sliding a sleek silver flash drive across the polished walnut table. His voice was smooth, completely devoid of urgency. "You push this patch into the supply chain prediction algorithm before 5 o'clock today. We lock our financial reports for Q3, and by Monday morning, Omnicorp signs the acquisition agreement." I did not touch the drive. My personal tablet was open, displaying the raw diagnostic code of the patch he had emailed me an hour prior. "This is not an optimization patch, Julian," I said, keeping my tone deadpan and steady. "This script forcefully injects fabricated efficiency metrics into our logistics module. It inflates our supply line reliability by 25% and hides operational latency in medical supply distribution." Julian leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "It is an alternative interpretation of predictive trends. We are presenting our future potential to the buyers." "It is fraud," I corrected plainly. "In health technology, supply chain data dictates when hospitals receive life-saving equipment, pharmaceuticals, and surgical tools. If I deploy this patch, real medical facilities will experience catastrophic supply shortfalls within 90 days because the algorithm will be operating on pure fiction. It violates every data safety standard, federal regulation, and professional ethics code I signed when I built this system." Julian did not yell. He did not pound his fist on the table. That was not his style. Instead, he let out a soft, dismissive scoff and shook his head, looking at me as if I were a child failing to grasp basic arithmetic. "Ethics," Julian repeated, smiling thin and cold. "This is precisely why you spend your life staring at green text on a black terminal while I run a multi-million-dollar enterprise. You are far too rigid. Phoebe, you lack a billionaire mindset. We are on the precipice of an acquisition that values this company at nearly $1 billion, and you are whimpering over statistical rounding errors." "It is not a rounding error," I replied, standing up and pulling my tablet back. "It is a deliberate falsification of core architecture. My answer is no. I will not sign off on it, and I will not push it to production." Julian's smile faded instantly, replaced by a chilling, reptilian stillness. He reached under the edge of the conference table and pressed a button on the internal comms panel. "Security to the executive suite." He spoke calmly into the speaker. He looked back up at me, adjusting his silk tie. "Effective immediately. Phoebe Brooks, your employment with Aegis Health Tech Solutions is terminated for direct insubordination and failure to comply with executive directives. You are terminated for cause. No severance pay, no transition period, no equity vesting." As the words left his mouth, my smartwatch vibrated twice. On the laptop sitting beside my cold mug, terminal windows began collapsing automatically. Red diagnostic screens flashed across the display as my central administrative access tokens were systematically revoked. The keycard reader on my hip emitted a high-pitched chirp, turning from a solid green light to a dead, blinking red light. The corporate network completely severed my digital identity in less than 10 seconds. Julian reached beneath a side credenza and picked up a flat-packed, empty cardboard box. He tossed it onto the center of the table between us. It landed with a dull thud. "You have 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings from your desk before corporate security escorts you off the property," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you attempt to touch a single server or download a single line of proprietary code, I will have our legal team destroy you in federal court." Most people in my position would have panicked. They would have begged for their job, cried over lost equity, or screamed at the injustice. I did none of those things. I picked up the cardboard box, folded the bottom flaps into place, and looked at Julian. A faint, nearly invisible smile touched the corners of my lips as I watched my terminal display the final automated message: "Administrative security credentials, revoked by executive order." Julian thought he had just stripped me of my power. He thought he had cut off my hands and thrown me out into the cold. What he did not understand was that by forcibly revoking my administrator status under the charge of insubordination, he had just triggered an automated domino effect embedded deep within the original system architecture 5 years ago. 15 minutes, I said quietly, clutching the cardboard box against my chest. "I will not need that long. Julian." I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass doors, leaving the chief executive officer sitting alone in his pristine boardroom, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just set his own enterprise on fire. Stepping out of the towering glass monolith of the Aegis headquarters, the crisp autumn air of Boston hit my face, a sharp contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled environment I had just been exiled from. I did not head to my apartment. Instead, I walked 3 blocks down a side street and ducked into an independent coffee shop. It was mid-afternoon, and the place was practically deserted, save for a barista wiping down the espresso machine and a lone student in the corner. I ordered a black tea, found a booth in the far back facing the door, and pulled my personal laptop from my bag. It was a rugged, custom-built machine, shielded by multiple layers of military-grade encryption and biometric locks. As the operating system booted up, I took a slow, deep breath. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. My mind drifted back 5 years. Aegis was not always a corporate behemoth, preparing for a billion-dollar acquisition. Half a decade ago, they were bleeding capital, struggling to keep their legacy systems functional, and staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. Their supply chain architecture was a mess of tangled, outdated code. During that desperate period, working entirely on my own time, on my own equipment, in the dead of night, I rebuilt the core predictive algorithm from scratch. Because the intellectual property was generated outside of company hours and without company resources, the base code belonged entirely to me. When Aegis desperately needed it to survive, I granted them a commercial use license. But I was not naive. I knew what corporate greed could do to pure logic. So, I embedded a very specific, heavily fortified stipulation into the licensing agreement, the special ethics clause. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved under a generic alias. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Brooks," Marcus Thorne said, his tone laced with the kind of weariness that only comes from decades in the legal trenches. "It is the middle of the workday. Tell me you are not calling just to check on my blood pressure." Marcus was a 68-year-old independent intellectual property attorney, a ruthless veteran of American corporate law. He had spent his career dissecting Fortune 500 contracts and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He was the one who had helped me draft that very license agreement. I just got fired. Marcus, I said quietly, taking a sip of my tea. There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a lighter flicking, followed by a slow exhale. Julian Vance? Marcus asked. Julian Vance, I confirmed. He tried to force me to push a fabricated optimization patch into the supply chain algorithm to artificially inflate our logistics reliability by 25% ahead of the Omnicorp buyout. I refused. He terminated me for cause. No severance, no transition. The low rumble of Marcus chuckling echoed through the receiver. It was a dark, amused sound. He actually did it, Marcus muttered, the amusement turning into sharp, professional focus. Let us review the parameters of the trap. Phoebe, Section 4, Paragraph B of your licensing contract. If the creator is terminated, penalized, or coerced as a direct result of refusing to execute data fraud, what happens? The commercial use rights granted to Aegis Health Tech Solutions are immediately and irrevocably revoked, I recited from memory, staring at the encrypted files on my screen. The entirety of the predictive algorithm reverts to the exclusive, undivided ownership of the original creator. Exactly, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a lethal, businesslike cadence. But the clause is entirely dependent on the official documentation of your termination. We need proof that he fired you for refusing the fraudulent order, not just because he did not like your hoodie. Are you absolutely certain he logged the real reason into the human resources system? Arrogant men usually try to cover their tracks. I opened my encrypted email client and pulled up the final message that had hit my inbox exactly 2 minutes after Julian called security. I am looking at the automated termination notice generated by the human resources software right now, I told him. Julian was too arrogant and in too much of a rush to mask it. Under the official reason for immediate dismissal, it explicitly states, failure to comply with Q3 data directives and executive insubordination. Marcus let out a loud, genuine laugh this time. It was the sound of a predator spotting an open gate. He put it in writing, Marcus said, practically grinning through the phone. The absolute fool put the violation of the ethics clause directly into the permanent corporate record. Forward that email to my encrypted server right now. I tapped the trackpad, sending the heavily encrypted file transfer. Done. Beautiful, Marcus murmured, already typing furiously on his end. I am drafting the official notice of license termination as we speak. I will route it through an anonymous, untraceable proxy and drop it directly into the Aegis internal legal dashboard. By the time their general counsel finds it, it will be too late. But tell me, Phoebe, what is the mechanical status of the software? I closed the email client and opened a hidden command terminal. A string of green data scrolled across the black background. The core logic block I designed has a legal kill switch, I explained, leaning back against the vinyl booth. It is tethered to my personal administrative credentials. It requires my biometric authentication ping every single Monday morning at dawn to refresh the security token. If I am not in the system to authenticate it, the predictive routing protocols automatically freeze to prevent unauthorized data manipulation. And since Julian just permanently revoked your access, Marcus said, catching the implications immediately. Exactly, I whispered, snapping my laptop shut. Tomorrow is Sunday, but at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the entire supply chain system of Aegis Health Tech Solutions is going to hit a concrete wall. The sun rose over Boston, casting a crisp autumn light into my apartment. My alarm clock chirped precisely at 6:30 in the morning. I stretched, enjoying the rare luxury of a slow, uninterrupted start to the day. I walked to the kitchen, boiled some water, steeped a cup of Earl Grey tea, and carried the steaming mug into my living room. I sat cross-legged on my plush sofa and booted up my secondary, highly secured monitor. It was time for the show. Through a heavily obfuscated backdoor terminal I had secretly built strictly for emergency diagnostic purposes, I possessed a one-way mirror directly into the Aegis Health Tech internal network. I could not alter any commands from this vantage point, but I could watch the data traffic flow in real time. As the digital clock on my screen ticked closer to 8 o'clock, the normal hum of digital activity on their corporate servers began to build. Logistics coordinators across the East Coast were logging into their workstations, preparing to route hundreds of millions of dollars in medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, and surgical tools to various hospitals. Then, the clock struck exactly 8. Instantly, the data streams flatlined, the visual representation of the network traffic, usually a rushing river of blue and green nodes, slammed into a solid, impenetrable wall across the city. Inside the gleaming glass tower I had been forcefully escorted out of just 3 days prior. Thousands of employee monitors simultaneously flickered, froze, and locked. I did not need to be standing in the room to know exactly what they were seeing. A massive, glaring red error window was currently dominating every single terminal hooked into the supply chain grid. The interface displayed one brutal line of text: ownership license required, access denied. The multi-hundred-million-dollar heart of Aegis Health Tech had just stopped beating entirely. Through my backdoor access to their internal communications server, the corporate panic blossomed like a beautiful, chaotic flower. The general company chat channels exploded with confused, frantic messages from low-level employees, but I filtered those out immediately. I focused strictly on the executive and senior engineering channels. Julian Vance was losing his mind. I watched his user handle frantically tag every senior developer and systems administrator in the building. I was demanding a physical presence in the main server room immediately. I could perfectly picture the scene. Dozens of highly paid, deeply stressed engineers sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights, slamming energy drinks, and desperately typing command overrides on their keyboards. They tried everything in the playbook. I watched the server logs as they attempted a brute force entry, which the system immediately slapped down and locked out. Then, they tried to bypass the authorization protocol entirely by routing around the primary gateway. That failed miserably. Finally, I saw the command string for a total system rollback to Friday afternoon's backup servers. It was the standard panic button for any catastrophic enterprise failure. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot tea and smiled against the rim of the ceramic mug. The rollback command bounced off an invisible digital shield. The core structure was not just password protected, it was sealed inside a customized quantum encryption shell I had painstakingly engineered over 3 years ago, without my specific biometric signature. Trying to crack that encryption layer with standard corporate computing hardware would take roughly 400 years. They were locked out of their own house, and the deadbolts were made of titanium. The executive chat logs were a masterpiece of corporate unraveling. The vice president of operations was typing in all capital letters, demanding to know why transport trucks in Chicago were not receiving their routing manifests. The chief financial officer was demanding a rigid timeline for a fix, absolutely terrified of the impending revenue hemorrhage. Directors were viciously throwing each other under the bus, desperately trying to assign blame for a catastrophe they did not even begin to comprehend. Right in the middle of this digital bloodbath, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass coffee table. The caller identification displayed the name of Julian's executive assistant. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it vibrated again, then again, over the next 45 minutes. The phone practically danced across the glass surface. I eventually picked it up and accessed the visual voicemail log. The evolution of the messages was purely comedic and deeply satisfying. The first voicemail, left at 8:15, was stern and authoritative. The assistant relayed Julian's demand that I answer the phone immediately to provide the bypass code, threatening severe legal action and federal involvement for corporate sabotage. The fourth voicemail, left at 8:40, dropped all the threats entirely. The assistant sounded breathless and shaky, asking if I could just come into the office for a brief, highly paid consultation to resolve a minor technical glitch. By the ninth voicemail, left just past 9 o'clock, the facade had completely shattered. It was Julian himself on the line. His smooth, arrogant boardroom voice was completely gone, replaced by a strained, high-pitched urgency. He was practically begging into the receiver. He promised to reinstate my employment immediately, double my annual salary, and instantly pay out a maximum quarter-3 performance bonus if I just gave them the encryption key over the phone. He called my termination a tragic misunderstanding. He called it a rash decision made under extreme stress. I deleted the voicemails, muted the device entirely, and tossed the phone onto the empty cushion beside me. Their current state of hyperventilation was merely the opening act. Julian was terrified of the immediate operational failure and the furious board members, but I knew he was hiding a much darker, much heavier secret from the rest of his frantic executive team. Tomorrow was not just another Tuesday on the calendar. Tomorrow was the exact day the board of directors and the legal teams were scheduled to finalize the massive acquisition deal with the Titan conglomerate, Omnicorp. Julian had fired me to ensure his fraudulent data made the company look completely flawless for the buyers. Instead, he had just handed the buyers a hollowed-out carcass with no functional product. He was staring down the barrel of a ruined merger, and he knew absolutely nothing could save his career unless I opened those doors. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it became glaringly obvious to Julian Vance that his checkbook could not buy his way out of a deadlocked network. When bribery and desperate pleading failed, he stripped away his polished executive persona and revealed the ruthless, dirty street brawler underneath. He stopped trying to negotiate and decided to use force. I was sitting at my kitchen island, calmly reviewing legal statutes on my tablet, when my apartment's wireless router suddenly choked. The green indicator lights on the device blinked furiously for 3 seconds before going completely dark. My primary internet connection flatlined. It was not a random service outage. It was a highly targeted, brute force denial of service attack. They were aggressively flooding my local network to knock down my perimeter firewalls. Julian had hired a team of gray hat hackers, digital mercenaries operating in the shadows, to physically break into my home network and steal the encryption keys right off my personal hard drive. I did not panic. I simply reached over and booted up a secondary, air-gapped terminal I kept strictly for offensive countermeasures. I knew exactly what these hired guns were looking for, and I knew exactly how they operated. What they did not realize was that launching a cyber attack against a lead systems architect inside her own customized environment was the equivalent of walking blindfolded into a minefield. I had anticipated this exact dirty tactic the moment Julian threatened me on Friday. I had spent my entire weekend constructing a digital snare known in cybersecurity circles as a honeypot. For those unfamiliar, a honeypot is essentially a decoy vault. It is a fake server environment, intentionally left, just vulnerable enough to look like a poorly defended gold mine. Inside this isolated digital room, I had placed a massive, heavily encrypted file with a highly enticing title, Core Algorithm Master Override Key. Through my offline diagnostic tools, I watched the intrusion team systematically break through the superficial outer firewall I had purposely weakened for them. They moved with aggressive arrogance, tunneling straight toward the decoy directory, like digital thieves spotting a diamond on a pedestal. They grabbed the file and instantly retreated, severing the connection to cover their tracks. I could perfectly imagine them sitting in some dark basement, high-fiving each other, immediately dialing Julian to proudly announce they had secured the prize. They took that stolen file and carried it straight back to the Aegis corporate servers, intending to plug it into the mainframe to unlock the frozen supply chain system. That was their fatal mistake. The file was not a decryption key. It was a Trojan horse carrying a highly sophisticated, stealth-based extraction malware payload. The absolute poetry of the situation was that Julian's own expensive hackers had just manually bypassed every single Aegis internal security protocol to deploy my code directly into the heart of their own network. The second they executed that file on the Aegis administrator terminal, the payload detonated. It did not freeze the system further, nor did it cause any visible damage. Instead, it woke up silently and operated like a microscopic vacuum cleaner. It bypassed the standard logistical directories and aggressively hunted for a very specific digital fingerprint. It searched for the exact metadata of the fraudulent optimization patch. Julian had tried to force me to upload, moving at lightning speed. My malware rapidly scraped every single piece of hidden evidence detailing his Q3 financial manipulation. It grabbed the fake spreadsheets, the altered performance metrics, and most importantly, his direct, internal emails to the accounting department ordering the falsification of the logistics reports. Within mere seconds, the malware gathered all of this incredibly damning evidence, locked it inside an impenetrable encrypted folder, and fired a perfect duplicated copy directly into the secure offshore inbox of my attorney, Marcus Thorne. Julian's hired guns had just done my dirty work for me. They had unknowingly acted as the ultimate corporate whistleblowers, delivering the murder weapon directly to the prosecution. 10 minutes after this payload detonated and sent its package, my phone vibrated on the cellular data network. It was an email from Julian Vance himself. The hackers must have realized the key was fake when it failed to unlock the system, and Julian was now completely unhinged. The email was a masterpiece of desperate corporate intimidation. He threatened to drag me into federal court for the crime of digital arson. He claimed he was having his legal team draft a lawsuit demanding tens of millions of dollars in corporate damages, promising to ensure I would spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary for corporate espionage if I did not physically walk into the office and fix the system by 5 o'clock. I read his long, furious rant twice. I did not feel an ounce of fear. I did not consult Marcus on how to word my defense. I simply hit the reply button and typed a single, devastatingly calm response. Received. See you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Do not forget to invite the Omnicorp representatives. I hit send, closed my laptop, and walked into the kitchen to make dinner. The board was set. The pieces were trapped, and tomorrow, I was going to burn his empire to the ground. I walked through the towering revolving glass doors of the Aegis Health Tech building at exactly 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. The atmosphere in the grand lobby was entirely different from the sterile, arrogant calm I had left behind days ago. The air was thick with a frantic, suffocating tension. Walking closely beside me was Marcus Thorne. He wore a slightly rumpled tweed suit and carried a battered leather briefcase that looked entirely out of place among the sleek, modern corporate architecture. But he walked with the quiet, lethal confidence of an apex predator entering a familiar hunting ground. Before we could even reach the security turnstiles to sign in as visitors, a tall, sharply dressed man aggressively intercepted us. It was Trenton, the lead corporate counsel for Aegis. He was flanked by two massive security guards. He did not offer a professional greeting. He did not ask us to step into a private office. Instead, he violently shoved a thick stack of legal documents directly at my chest. I did not raise my hands to catch them. I simply let the papers hit my jacket and scatter across the polished marble floor. That is a draft of the criminal complaint we are filing in exactly 15 minutes, Trenton snarled, his face flushed with a desperate anger, a small bead of sweat forming at his temple. Julian is upstairs in his office right now, on the phone with the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are having you arrested for felony corporate extortion, unauthorized access to a protected computer system, and digital terrorism. You have one last chance to hand over the decryption keys and sign a full, unconditional confession, or you are going to federal prison for the rest of your life. I thought he had me cornered. He thought the heavy, terrifying weight of the federal government would crush a software engineer into submission. He was operating on the standard corporate playbook of intimidation and sheer financial bullying. But he failed to realize that I was not playing a game of digital sabotage. I was playing a game of high-stakes legal warfare, and I was holding the absolute winning hand. I did not flinch. I did not even look down at the threatening papers covering the floor. I simply turned my head toward my attorney. Marcus, would you please show this gentleman what we were doing late last night while his boss was busy hiring cheap hackers to break into my home? I asked calmly, keeping my voice perfectly level. Marcus let out a dry, raspy chuckle. He unlatched the heavy brass locks of his leather briefcase, reached inside, and deliberately pulled out a single, pristine manila folder. He opened it and presented a beautifully embossed, thick sheet of paper to Trenton. The top right corner bore the undeniable, heavy blue seal of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. I strongly advise you to tell your chief executive officer to put the phone down, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a register dripping with professional condescension. Because calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now would be a remarkably stupid career move. Trenton stared at the government stamp, his aggressive posture faltering slightly. His eyes darted between Marcus and the document. What is this? That is an officially filed, fully accepted whistleblower protection petition, Marcus explained smoothly, savoring every single syllable. Submitted to the Federal Oversight Committee at 2 o'clock this morning. My client has formally reported Julian Vance for attempting to coerce a subordinate into committing severe financial fraud. Specifically, for ordering the falsification of Q3 logistics data to artificially inflate the company valuation by hundreds of millions of dollars prior to a major corporate acquisition. Trenton's face completely drained of color. The angry flush vanished, replaced by a sickly pale white. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Furthermore, Marcus continued, driving the final nail into the coffin without an ounce of mercy, attached to that petition is a fully encrypted, perfectly verified cache of internal emails, direct executive orders, and fraudulent performance matrices that your boss so graciously allowed us to extract from your own servers yesterday afternoon. The moment that petition was stamped by the federal government, every single server, hard drive, and network node inside this building was legally classified as a protected federal crime scene. I took a step closer to Trenton, closing the physical distance between us, and lowered my voice to a sharp, cutting whisper. So, if Julian wants to call the federal authorities to complain that his network is currently frozen, he is more than welcome to do so. But you should probably remind him that tampering with a locked computer system currently under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. My kill switch is the only thing preserving the crime scene from being altered. I am not a digital terrorist. Trenton, I am a federally protected witness preserving evidence. Do you still want to call the authorities, or should we go upstairs? The vast, echoing lobby fell into a stunning, absolute silence. Trenton looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine, heard the mechanical click, and realized his next breath would be his last. Before the broken lawyer could even attempt to formulate a coherent response, the sharp, rhythmic, commanding sound of high heels echoing across the marble floor shattered the tension. From the VIP seating area positioned near the private executive elevators, a woman stepped forward into the light. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blazer, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying authority that instantly made Trenton look like a confused intern. I recognized her immediately from the covers of financial magazines. It was Sarah Sterling, the chief legal officer of the Omnicorp conglomerate. She had arrived early to prepare for the massive acquisition signing, and based on the cold, calculating look in her piercing eyes, she had heard every single word of our exchange. Sarah Sterling did not even glance at Trenton. She practically brushed right past the entire Aegis legal team as if they were insignificant pieces of furniture. She stopped directly in front of me, reaching into the pocket of her blazer. She pulled out a thick, minimalist cardstock business card and extended it toward me with a steady hand. I think our corporation is negotiating to buy this algorithm from the wrong person, Sarah Sterling said, her voice smooth, cold, and utterly devoid of sympathy for the collapsing company around us. We have a lot of capital on the table, and I prefer to do business with the architect, not the liability. Shall we speak privately, Ms. Brooks? The emergency meeting convened exactly at noon inside the same 42nd floor glass penthouse boardroom where I had been fired just 96 hours prior. The balance of power had violently shifted. Julian Vance sat at the head of the polished walnut table, but he looked like a completely broken man. His custom-tailored suit was heavily wrinkled, his silk tie was pulled loose, and a visible sheen of cold sweat coated his pale forehead. He was flanked by the 7 senior members of the Aegis Board of Directors, all of whom stared straight ahead with grim, terrified expressions, looking as though they were attending their own funerals. On the opposite side of the long table sat myself, Marcus Thorne, and Sarah Sterling. Julian leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to project authority. This entire situation is a gross misrepresentation of corporate law. Phoebe signed a standard employment contract 3 years ago. Anything developed under our roof, using our resources, belongs exclusively to Aegis Health Tech Solutions. Her ownership claims are entirely invalid, and we will prove that in court. Marcus smiled. It was a terrifying, joyful smile. He opened his laptop, tapped a few keys, and mirrored his screen to the massive digital display on the boardroom wall. "You are referring to her standard employment agreement," Marcus said, his voice echoing clearly across the silent room. "But we are not talking about her daily corporate tasks. We are talking about the core predictive algorithm, which she built entirely from scratch 5 years ago, on her own personal time, when this company was nearly bankrupt and desperate for a lifeline." A massive document appeared on the screen. "This is the original ethical license agreement," Marcus continued, pointing to the display. "Notice the digital signature at the absolute bottom of the page. It is yours, Julian. You signed it at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, 5 years ago. You were so desperate to have a functional product to show your early investors that you authorized this contract without having your legal team read a single word of it. You agreed to the special ethics clause. The exact moment you formally fired my client for refusing to commit federal data fraud, your commercial license instantly evaporated." Julian opened his mouth to stammer a defense, but no words came out. The board members turned to look at him with undisguised horror. Sarah Sterling did not wait for Julian to recover. She placed her hands flat on the table and commanded the room. "Omnicorp has spent the last 6 months conducting deep due diligence on Aegis Health Tech," Sarah said, her tone absolute freezing ice. "We were under the impression we were purchasing a billion-dollar logistics enterprise. Instead, we have discovered an organization riddled with systemic financial fraud, a chief executive who is currently under active federal investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and a network architecture you do not even legally own." She paused, letting the crushing reality settle over the Aegis executives. "Omnicorp is officially withdrawing our offer to acquire Aegis Health Tech," Sarah declared. "However, our internal valuation team has independently assessed the core supply chain algorithm. We value the pure mathematics of that system alone at $918 million. Therefore, Omnicorp will be signing a direct, exclusive acquisition and leasing contract with the sole legal proprietor of that software. That proprietor is Phoebe Brooks." The boardroom erupted. The chairman of the Aegis board stood up so fast, his heavy leather chair crashed into the glass wall behind him. He looked at Julian with utter, unadulterated disgust. "Julian, you have single-handedly destroyed the entire valuation of this enterprise and exposed all of us to federal criminal prosecution," the chairman practically shouted. "We are calling an immediate emergency board vote to cooperate with the authorities. All in favor of terminating Julian Vance from the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second?" Without a single moment of hesitation, 7 hands shot high into the air. Julian collapsed back into his chair. The breath completely left his lungs. He was no longer a CEO. He was just an unemployed man staring down a decade in federal prison. "As part of our agreement to not pursue further civil damages against you personally," Marcus told him, sliding a thick, unforgiving document across the table, "you will sign over the unconditional physical ownership of all local servers housing the algorithm to my client right now." Julian did not argue. He did not speak. His hands shook violently as he took the pen, signed his name on the dotted line, and pushed the paper back across the wood. I stood up from my chair and calmly smoothed the lapels of my dark jacket. I reached across the table, picked up a silver Aegis Company souvenir pen resting near Julian's notepad, and casually clipped it into my pocket. I looked directly into Julian's hollow, defeated eyes one last time. "You were right, Julian," I said softly, making sure he heard every single word. "Missing a party does not end my career. It just started my empire." I turned and walked out of the glass boardroom, leaving the ruins of his legacy behind me. I took the private executive elevator down to the main lobby and stepped out through the revolving doors into the brilliant, blinding afternoon sunlight of Boston. As I stood on the busy sidewalk, my phone chimed with a clear, sharp tone. It was a notification from my highly secure banking application, confirming the successful arrival of the first massive advance payment from Omnicorp. I smiled, raised my hand to hail a passing yellow taxi, and seamlessly blended into the free-moving crowd. Thank you so very much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you thought today's story was great, please remember that, because our channel has been completely demonetized, we absolutely will not be uploading any new videos here for the foreseeable future, and we are moving all our operations over to Patreon. Please help us survive and grow by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear the absolute best, most detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Thank you again, and take care.